me introduce JV and Pam. So JV Valladolid is a Newark native, first-generation child of Andean immigrants. JV has worked in reproductive justice in Newark for over 12 years, has been featured in media surrounding the impact of environmental racism on reproductive health, and has served as a sexuality educator for youth, Spanish speakers, and adults with intellectual developmental disabilities. JV is currently serving as Frontlines Communications Lead for the Ironbound Community Corporation's Environmental Justice Team, threading together a passion for environmental justice and public health. You know, I don't know if we're on. We're supposed to be live streamed. Okay, well, we'll go ahead. And Pam Litvak, PhD. Pam Factor Litvak received a PhD from Columbia, working under the supervision of Dr. Zena Stein and Joseph Graziano. Shortly thereafter, she joined the faculty of the Department of Epidemiology, so one could say that she is homegrown. She is a professor in the Department of Epidemiology, where she is also vice chair for research and the associated dean for research for the Mailman School of Public Health. Her main area of research is on the life course consequences of early environmental exposures, defined broadly as environmental contaminants, social circumstances, and maternal conditions, and most recently, opioid exposure. She is particularly interested in providing data to inform the biological and social whereby early exposures affect later life outcomes. Among her methodological interests is developing methods to explore associations between contaminant mixtures and outcomes. Dr. Factor Litvak has worked internationally on projects in the former Yugoslavia, Bangladesh, Sweden, Israel, and Brazil. She's currently working in the urban slums in India on studies of the effects of air pollution on children's health and on developing policies to reduce trash burning, a major problem. She is the author of over 200 papers in scholarly journals. Dr. Factor Litvak was recently named the chief editor for the new journal Frontiers in Environmental Health. I think we're going to start with you, Pam, and then JV, because I think you're going to speak a little more generally, and then Pam, you'll speak specifically.
Okay, so thank you very much for that kind introduction. I want to first thank JV and all of the community groups that work on environmental justice problems, not only here in the US, but around the world, because without them, the communities would not be aware that such problems exist and of the harmful health effects. I work with many community groups. In fact, even in my studies overseas, we have community groups leading field work, because it's kind of ridiculous for me to lead a study in India, right? Walking around talking to people because I don't look like them. So I really appreciate all the work that the community groups do in terms of addressing environmental problems and environmental justice. So excuse me, I also have a cold, so I'm trying not to cough that much. So I was listening to the film again tonight. I was jotting down notes of some of the contaminants that I heard mentioned. So I heard heavy metals such as lead, mercury, manganese, arsenic, all of which I've worked on over the course of my career. I heard about air pollution. We measure air pollution most generally using particulate matter in the air, usually very tiny particles of 2.5 microns, which is about the third of the width of a strand of hair. Other air pollutants and products of combustion, polyaromatic hydrocarbons or PAHs. I heard a lot about plastics, which, you know, we're supposed to recycle, but I bet everybody slips up once in a while and throws plastic in their trash. Or prior to the recycling efforts in this country, people threw plastics in their trash. I study plastics a lot, and especially when they're volatilized. these contaminants that are plasticizers, that make plastics flexible, that make personal care products smell nice. They're called phthalates, and they're also another class called parabens. Those are particularly toxic to developing fetuses when pregnant women are exposed to them, and also have lifelong consequences even when adults are exposed. I also heard, in part, sort of other additive contaminants in the mix. So we heard about sewage treatment plants in the ironbound, all over the world actually. When those plants overflow, like in the course of a hurricane, Hurricane Sandy, particularly bad rainy days here in Newark, and in some places, like the area surrounding Jamaica Bay in the Brooklyn, Queens area, they have what's called sunny day flooding, or nuisance flooding, they call it also. And that's when high tide comes. Even if it's sunny, water from Jamaica Bay flows into the Jamaica Bay area, including from the large sewage treatment plant that is located right near Kennedy Airport. And it's not only sewage, but it's the what we're concerned with really is the pathogens that are in the sewage, the bacteria and the viruses. I also heard a lot about noise in this film, which is understudied. The health effects of chronic noise exposure, the impact of noise on sleep disturbances, particularly in children, in infants and children, as well as in older adults. So what do all of these contaminants have in common? They have health effects, and many of the health effects are very broad in general, and most of these contaminants that I've talked about are associated with things like childhood cognitive development. Now, autism is part of that. Autism is particularly difficult to study for a lot of reasons. I can expand afterwards individually if you like. But I'm talking about even changes in children's IQ scores, for example. So IQ has generally a normal distribution. It looks like a U shape, and the mean is 100. And usually we call children who are 2 standard deviations below that mean, or in the bottom about 6%, we call them cognitively impaired, let's say. I don't like the term, but that's what people use. But if you shift that distribution down and make everybody's IQ go down by 2 points, which for an individual child doesn't matter, but if you make everybody go down 2 points, you shift that, and the bottom part of that curve now has many more children in it and will cost society many more millions of dollars in terms of treatment and of remediation in terms of getting children to learn. And so this is a huge problem because even subtle shifts in a health outcome on a population level have severe ramifications, economically, socially, and what we call in terms of human capital development. So the ability of people to lead productive lives and to contribute to society. This is actually part of my project in India, is based all about urban capital, human capital in the urban slums. So I also wanted to talk a little bit just in general about some of the health outcomes that were mentioned in the film. And so there was a whole list of them. I made some notes: asthma, autism, rashes, breast cancer, cancer in general, congenital heart defects, developmental disabilities, and there were some others. Those are all very severe outcomes. I can add to the list because many of these contaminants are also associated with cardiovascular disease, with impaired lipid or fat metabolism, so it leads to high cholesterol, with high blood pressure, and with cognitive outcomes in older adults like dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, and many other outcomes. So many of those outcomes, in the film, I just want to point this out, and I told JV this when we met earlier, that you can't talk about them all in the same breath because they're not all, a lot of them are random occurrences. So even people living in pristine areas like Short Hills have many of the same health outcomes. So it's really when you see patterns of the same health outcome over and over and over again, can you begin to think that there might be something called a cluster. Clusters also arise by chance, but when it's reported to the New Jersey Department of Health or to the CDC, they are obligated by law to investigate the clusters and to see what happens if there truly is an association with what the people suspect in a given area. This is what happened in studies of autism in New Jersey near Superfund sites, which are these big waste sites associated with industry. And the CDC was mandated to investigate so-called clusters of autism. This happened in the 1990s. And by the way, did not find an association, even though we know that now know that some of the toxic substances in those Superfund sites are indeed associated with autism if women are exposed during the prenatal period. So what does it all mean? I mean, what it means to me as an environmental epidemiologist, I've been doing this for a very long time. What it really means to me is a focus on how to prevent illnesses, how do we handle this, and how do we go about formulating policies and strategies to prevent things like this by happening. So one issue that was really eloquently brought up in the film is the issue of solid waste management. So everybody is familiar, several weeks ago in Indiana, there was a huge trash fire. Did anybody see those images on TV and in the New York Times? Terrible trash fire, tons and tons of contaminants. There were plastics there, there were other volatile compounds, really, really horrible. And it reminds me of working in India, where they burn trash all the time. And, you know, we're doing some work now in India to think about strategies to reduce trash burning. In India, which happens on a daily basis, I mean, we were walking around the slums in Jaipur last fall, and I have to apologize for using the word slum. That's the word they use in India. Calling them informal settlements is also insults people who live in those areas because they view them as their permanent homes. So it's very difficult to find a correct word. But I use the word slum because that's what they call, what people who live in India call those areas. There were kids playing soccer, and maybe 50 feet away there was a huge trash fire, actually. So why do they burn trash in India? They burn it for warmth, they burn it to cook, and they burn it to get rid of it because there's no meaningful municipal waste, solid waste management program, especially for those urban slum areas. So what are we doing in India? So one thing that we're doing is developing 2 smartphone applications. Everybody seems to have a smartphone in these areas. And one smartphone application is going to be cartoons about the hazards of trash burning and what health effects it could have and consequences. The other one is going to be, along with the Rajasthan Environmental Health Board and the Jaipur Municipal Council, we're going to be doing an immediate trash burning reporting system from smartphones so that things can be addressed immediately. That's there, but what can we do here? And in particular, what can we do here in terms of things like that huge incinerator, which is still working even though they still don't have their permit, right? Well, what we could do here is to think, to start little. And I have this whole philosophy, and it's my own opinion, of starting little. So what can we do as individuals first that can then be transferred to larger and larger sort of concentric circles until you get to the outer circles. One is to pay attention to what you throw in the garbage and what you throw in the recycling bins, because they're really handled differently. And so I think more education for the population, more having small consequences for violating your recycling or not recycling bin, your trash can instead of your recycling bin, will, anything in this country that hurts your pocketbooks sort of hurts, you get annoyed at. So certainly doing things like that while these larger issues are being worked on. Education in the schools, we found that in Bangladesh, when we were studying arsenic in the water supply in Bangladesh, that doing the education in the schools to the children to tell their parents not to pump, we painted well handles either red or green. We said to the kids, we said, don't you tell your parents not to use the red pumps, it's bad water, only use the green ones. Well, it worked because the kids were constantly nagging their parents. I'm really serious. So more education in the schools about these issues with community educators is a wonderful way to start dealing with some of these problems. And I'll take questions after JV, okay?
So hi, folks. Thank you so much for having me as well. It's really cool to be on panel with you, Pam. I knew I recognized you before, but I was like, from where? So I'm JV. I do the frontline communications. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. Awesome. So I thought I would just start with where the film left off. So that was 2019. At the very end of the film, it said that Covanta was up for a permit renewal. Those permit renewals happen periodically. Covanta just in November applied for their permit renewal once again. On record, as far as we have from, I believe, 2014, there have been over 800 air permit violations committed by Covanta. Covanta, as mentioned in the film, is one of the top 5 emitters in the entire state of lead, mercury, and arsenic. But the reason why the air permit keeps getting renewed is for a lot of reasons. One, as Pam had mentioned, there's not a lot of conversation about it. Not a lot of folks are showing up to these actually public meetings to be able to submit a public comment. It's pretty much meetings that happen and do get announced, and sometimes they're announced in a very brief, small paragraph in an obscure newspaper, but it's still counted legally as telling people that there's a hearing or that they're going to renew their permits. So that's one. And two, the language and the policy. So a lot of these facilities, and I'll just think about Covanta because I do consider Covanta sort of our mascot for environmental justice in Newark, but also for our state, is that they use a lot of greenwashing tactics. They're very well funded, and they also, instead of saying incineration, they've become very clever to change the language and instead say things like, we are gasifying. We are, right. So it's still burning, and we know this, but as long as they don't say that they're burning, they are not technically, an incinerator, and they even get renewable energy credits because they say we're producing some energy and we're trying the best we can. So that's why Covanta is sort of the mascot to me, because Covanta, when it was first proposed in the 80s, it was meant to have a 30-year life cycle, and we still have Covanta functioning today. Covanta is the largest garbage incinerator in all of New Jersey. It's mentioned in the film, but it's worth mentioning, and for y'all to remember and tell people that not only is Newark home to the largest garbage incinerator in all of New Jersey, but also the highest asthma rate in the entire state. In New Jersey, we have a rate of about 1 out of every 12 people may have asthma. In Newark, we have 1 out of every 4 people that have asthma, besides all of the other health issues that we've just heard about. Another update about Covanta is that I mentioned in November, they reapplied for their permit. this November that just passed. At the same time, we had one of our 3 fossil fuel power plants up for permit renewal as well. So the Ironbound is also home to 3 fossil fuel power plants. It is a 4 square mile neighborhood, predominantly black and brown, a huge amount of foreign-born people, and also linguistically isolated, besides being low wealth. So there's actually at least, as main languages, Spanish and Portuguese that are the main languages in the Ironbound. Just to kind of get an idea of that information sharing, how many people really know about this information. So we had one of the power plants up for renewal, but instead of applying our energy as organizers and community organization, trying to get people to show up to the Covanta hearing and say, this is not okay, you shouldn't be allowed to renew your permit for whatever reason, we have many reasons, we decided to focus on a sludge facility that was coming also to the community, a brand new facility. And I want this to be a little interactive. Do we know what sludge is? Can anyone guess? So it's solids from human waste. So it's a human waste processing facility that wanted to reinforce concrete. Also in the video, we know that we have a lot of concrete in the Ironbound. It's why we flood so much, because there's just not really a way of being able to mitigate the flooding. So we had to apply a lot of our energy to this sludge facility, even though we had a lot of other facilities at the same time trying to renew their permit. The good news is we were able to stop the sludge facility from coming into the neighborhood, which is huge. And just a little bit before then, we were also able to stop an Amazon Air Hub from coming into the Ironbound. They proposed to come into the Ironbound, and a little just quick fact is that we average about 4,000 trucks an hour in residential intersections close to schools or recreation centers in the Ironbound. So all that potholes, all the truck traffic are just diesel truck emissions serving a lot of the industries that we also unfortunately host in the Ironbound as well. And so the Amazon Air Hub, you can imagine, would have contributed a lot more air pollution, a lot more diesel emissions. And the way that we were able to organize and prevent that from happening is by asking Amazon for a community benefits agreement, to ask them what the workers' conditions would be, what their benefits would be, and that was not something Amazon was able to give us. And so that was one strategy that was really successful. And I say this because although Covanta is still functioning, there are a lot of things that we've been able to accomplish as a community who has been organized around environmental racism for several decades now. So as a small group of people, my team is less than 10 people, predominantly women and gender expansive people of color from communities that, if not Newark itself, look like Newark, who are doing this work right now. And so to say that a small organization and many community members throughout the state organized together are able to shut down a huge name like Amazon is something that is really motivating. So one other thing I want to mention has happened since the film is that New Jersey has passed one of the strongest environmental justice laws in the entire nation as of officially April 17th. It took over 12 years for some of the language that we heard in the film, like cumulative health impacts, to be written into this law. But it pretty much says that if there is a community that is more than likely a low-income Black and brown community, often 80% of the time really, that has these types of toxic facilities constantly coming into the neighborhood decade after decade, if a new facility wants to come in, for the first time ever, the Department of Environmental Protection is able to deny their permit, especially if they're going to cause any negative health impacts, any health stressors. And it's really interesting because the development of it also considered, and you can actually find this online, I can share this as a resource after, you can plug in your address and find out if your singular block is also impacted by some of these public health stressors. Because we can say, for example, Montclair, Montclair is really lovely, as is the Ironbound, but there are often certain pockets of neighborhood that are exposed to different health issues and different environmental injustices. So thankfully, we have the environmental justice law now, but what we do need to know about it is that it is a great start, but it doesn't undo decades of environmental racism and harm. And so what we are looking to do is focus on the policy that can complement the law. When we mention plastics, we are thinking about plastics now too, because plastics really are fossil fuels as well. They're just a byproduct. And they are only recycled at less than a 6% rate. So it's been really a huge failure of trying to think of recycling as our way out. So we are thinking about alternatives like offshore wind, for example, as one potential future, composting, which helps move away some of that waste that gets burned into the community. But one ask that I want for folks to take away is this one certain issue that we have now. So I mentioned that we have 3 fossil fuel power plants in a 4 square mile neighborhood. As of closer to 2 years now, we received a proposal for a 4th fossil fuel power plant to come into the neighborhood. We also saw the flooding in the video from Superstorm Sandy. So that was sewage in the neighborhood, and I can talk about that extensively. But what has happened since then is that FEMA gave money to that facility, the Passaic Valley Sewage Facility, and they took that money, and before, they didn't have a flood wall. They added a flood wall. It's brand new, and we see it now. Those open pits of sewage are still there, but that power outage and overflow of sewage into the streets hasn't happened since Sandy. And we've seen that during, again, huge storms like Hurricane Henri and Hurricane Ida. And so all this to say that the reason why they'd like to build a 4th power plant is because they believe that that's our way of getting out of potential sewage overflow and power outages. There's already been huge investments into hardening the grid, which is the way I think of it, plugging into an extension cable when we're out of outlets, so that we don't actually experience that kind of power outage. So it's been a 2-year battle, but some really great things that have come out of it. My job is communications, and so I do a lot of the public-facing media communication, is that it's been pretty much everywhere. It has been on NPR, ABC, even on Fox. It's been on so many different outlets. The mayor of Newark has signed off to say that he is against this 4th power plant. The county environmental commission, this is important because Newark is part of Essex County, as is Montclair. And so what we do say is that the entire Essex County Commission has signed off a resolution against this 4th facility. So that's great. And it also shows that it's not just Newark. It is places like Newark. It is places around Newark, because pollution doesn't stay and say, did the zip code change? I'm going to stay right here. It doesn't. Air keeps moving. The Superfund in our community is 17 miles long. And so that stretches out. The environmental justice issues is a very intersectional issue. It's something that we hope that everyone in New Jersey can show that they are invested in for whatever personal reason. We talk about it as an experience that's about, it's a Black Lives Matter issue, it is an immigration issue, it is a reproductive justice issue, it is so many different issues that we can take personally to heart. And so one thing that I do ask is, if you're wondering how do we get involved, we've had a lot of success in being able to show up every month virtually to Passaic Valley Sewage Commission's public hearings, and they get tired of us, and we get tired of them. We've been saying a lot of the same things, even if it's updates like the mayor's against this, Senator Teresa Ruiz is against this. Why are you still even trying? Even Governor Murphy has postponed the building much long ago, and we haven't heard much since, but it has been really helpful to have paused that. Now that the environmental justice law is out, we are unsure if their air permits are going to be considered under the EJ law or not. So this is still something that's very much up in the air. But when folks show up and they say, I'm not even from Newark, but this is important to me, that has made a tremendous difference to us. So I will end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. I think this really expands what the movie showed and brings us up to date. So I'd like to invite anybody who has a question to stand, state your name. We had a couple of questions that came. Well, one question is was, in this situation, is the situation improving at all? And what can we do as civilians to assist? And I think you've really kind of said that. Another person wrote in, Melissa Goldberg wrote in, Giordano Companies of Newark picks up our commingled recycling curbside based on the sheer volume and how it is commingled. I have an intuition that it never really gets recycled, just either goes to a dump, gets incinerated, most likely in Newark. Wealthy communities have the false sense that they are doing good. Is the intuition correct? And I think you've you've really spoken to that as well. How careful are we all when we recycle? But let me open it up. Do people have questions? And we have a mic. Do you want to come over? Oh, shit. Oh, they can hold it.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jordan Aronson. So I'm actually a teacher in Patterson, and I'm watching this. I can't help but think, how I'm sure it's similar in Patterson. Like it's probably just as bad, because I know that obviously the focus of the video was Newark, and it mentioned Camden as well. So, how bad is it in Patterson? As far as you know.
Thank you. So particularly in Patterson, I can't be sure to say what exactly is the situation, but what I can say is that the organization is now at a national level. So Ironbound Community Corporation is under the Climate Justice Alliance umbrella. So that means that we're in partnerships with communities that look just like ours, like Louisiana, Cancer Alley, Louisiana, and all throughout the country, to talk about what are the solutions and strategies that they've had. And when I think of Patterson, I also think about a legacy of toxins. So in Newark, we had the manufacturing of Agent Orange right at the Passaic River. It's what makes it one of the longest bodies of water that is contaminated in a Superfund site. We also have over 100 brownfield sites. And so those are sites where maybe there was a toxic facility that was manufacturing something that may have had chemicals or byproducts of that chemical, which make it so that that land should not have anything really break ground into it. Nothing should be built on it. And as we see, not all policies really get enforced and protect folks who need it the most. And so I would think that in Patterson, given a history of manufacturing, as we still see, that it's possible that there have been situations like in Newark. For example, we have a block in Ironbound Manufacturers Place where the Ronson Lighter Company was previously. And somehow, some way, someone got permission to build homes there. And so ground was broken, and folks of all different ages and folks that were coming to the daycare center of our organization were diagnosed with cancer. And so the EPA had to come out and install air filters. And so you can imagine what happens to the home values. And then beyond that, there's so much that comes with having an illness in your family, right? And what that means economically, all kinds of things. So I would think maybe brownfield sites, and it's always worth looking into what is happening. And that's actually how I got started in this. I grew up in Newark my entire life. I'm a first-generation person. And I just accepted that New Jersey smelled, right? How many people have ever smelled something kind of gross in Jersey? Right, but it's not our fault, really, right? It's not because we didn't bring our tote bag. It is a lot of corporate responsibility and also policy enforcement. So I got started in this because I started researching Superfund sites in college. So that's my answer.
Let me just add to that just for a second, that you also need to consider the context of each area that you want to study. So Newark also has, as was mentioned in the film, the port and the airport, which are major contributors to both noise, to air pollution, and to pollution from the jet fuel, runoffs. And Patterson doesn't have those, it has its own massive problems. So when you think about pollutants, and especially mixtures of pollutants and how the effects of pollutants may add up with each other, right? I think it's really important to think about the sources. So for example, when we build models to look at mixtures of pollutants, one model doesn't fit every place.
Yeah, and so to actually add on to that, my school building, like my school is very close to the Great Falls, so we could walk there, and like our building actually was a factory. I don't know exactly how long ago, but just to put that in perspective, but also I remember when we had Hurricane Ida, like we had like 2 days, we got like 2 days off of school because of all the flooding and like just all the impact from that. And I seem to recall also like Patterson, I think also maybe Clifton and Passaic, like that county, it took a while for them to get like running water like safely. Like they had to boil water for seemingly longer than anybody else, and like we couldn't use our water fountains at all. So I mean, I can only imagine like just all the different impacts of all these issues, like to my students and like our community. Thank you.
Nice job, guys. Pam and JV. Hi, I'm Richard Prince. Two-part question. Excuse my back. I thought I heard that this incinerator with the permit that's coming up for renewal handles like maybe 2% of the waste. So first part is, if the incinerator is actually shut down, hypothetically, there's still a lot of garbage and waste that has to be disposed of. So how would that get handled currently? And the second part, and I think Pam just alluded to it, it's not the only problem. You have the airplanes coming through, right, which is a massive problem. So the second part is the FAA or whatever local group also regulates planes. What percentage of the problem is from airplane fuel emissions and such, and how can that be dealt with? It just sounds like a massive problem. So either one of those would be great if you could address.
Thank you. So Covanta, over half of its garbage comes from New York, so the Lower East Side, and Covanta services over 27 municipalities outside of Newark. So it is the largest incinerator in New Jersey, and so it handles very likely a lot of communities outside of Newark. The garbage is being trucked in and burned there. But the way that we think about mitigating waste or handling waste in the future is, did you know, have you ever heard of reduce, reuse, recycle? Did you know that it's that way on purpose? I honestly didn't know until that long ago. Okay, so reduce, reuse, recycle on purpose. Because as we just heard, recycling is not doing so well. We only have certain numbers that we can recycle depending on where we're able to recycle it. A lot of them are non-recyclable, or because they're become contaminated in some way because of the caps, because of whatever was in them, they don't end up actually being recycled. And so when I said complementary policies to the environmental justice law of New Jersey, one example could be extended producer responsibility. So it's something to maybe look at in case you come across it. Extended producer responsibility puts the responsibility on the producer, as like it's just repeating the name, but it says that if you go into a store and you want to buy Coca-Cola, for example, I have never gone in and said, I need more plastic to be wrapped around this container or this six-pack. I really need more plastic. And so it really just says that the corporations should be responsible for actually recyclable materials when they're manufacturing their products. And so that would mitigate a lot of waste from the incinerator. And the farm serves as an organizing tool. It's a place to celebrate. It means that the reason why we fight for the community is because we love it, and so we also want to have fun in it and build the things we want. But we also talk about composting. We use it as a big opportunity. because a huge percentage of waste that goes into our garbage is actually organic waste that could be composted. So because I mentioned that we're in alliance with a lot of other states and organizations, Baltimore was actually able to shut down their incinerator. And so we're taking a lesson from them because it's true, what does then happen? And one thing that they have been trying to do in the aftermath is think about municipal-wide composting, where every municipality has a place where they can send their composting. It could create jobs, it could create energy, and it is definitely a big way that we can manage waste as well. And I forgot the second question.
The airport.
Oh, so the airports, there's many, so we also do housing, we also do ports work. So we mentioned that New Jersey and Elizabeth share one of the largest seaports on the east side of this country. And so we also are able to think about shaping policy that at the very least would have electric fleets of trucks that are coming in through the neighborhood, because it's not by fault of the truck drivers. They're just trying to meet deadlines and get paid. And so they do sometimes cut through residential streets, end up in traffic in our very densely populated neighborhoods. So that's one other piece that we think about because it is another contributor to pollution. But in terms of airports, I'm not the airport person. I feel like I'll have to get back to you on it.
We actually got a comment question from Lisa Vernon. Plastics is a huge problem. There are companies that repurpose various plastics into things like outdoor furniture. How can we get our plastics to be gathered up and utilized by these companies? And also, we don't even get to return bottles. You know, the deposit. In New York, you return your soda bottles, which we don't do. And we also don't, so that was one thing. And composting, we live in West Orange. We have to pay if we want composting taken from us. And that also New York City is starting. So, but what about plastics?
Okay, yeah.
Actually, it's not a question.
Oh,
I don't think it's live.
okay. Oh, it is live.
So if you speak, I'll repeat it.
I'll make it loud enough to hear. Those of us who live in the darling suburbs of Essex County have always thought of ourselves as safe from the mysteries of urban living. And all I can say now, with the shift of the wind, we become victims of that which we think we are safe from. And so I think that our involvement here tonight is trans-problematic. I think that each of us needs to know what to do, how to do it, how to help make this question turn into a thinking question that needs to be eliminated. Maybe not in our lifetime, but certainly in our times.
So the comment, for those of you who couldn't hear, the comment was about how members of this congregation who live in the beautiful suburbs in Essex County thought we were safe from the perils of urban living and particularly pollution. And now with a shift of the wind, we indeed can become victims very easily of the same kind of problems. And it was really begging for us to figure out solutions for everybody, including, and I want to stress that, you know, the environmental justice issue, not only in Newark, but in New York, I mean, the place in New York City with the worst air quality happens to be those rows of houses surrounding the Cross Bronx Expressway. If anybody's ever driven there, right? They have the worst air quality in New York City. South Bronx Unites is the community organization there. And we know that even from the pandemic, that people who live in urban areas that are fraught with both air pollution and other types of pollution had higher rates of COVID, And even if they were vaccinated, they're more likely to get COVID and more likely now to have long COVID as a sequelae, as well as higher rates of mortality once you had COVID. So the air pollution was a cofactor for many of the health effects that we now see and the sort of the remnants of the pandemic.
So I noticed in the credits that there was a call out to Rutgers Newark. So I was just wondering if ICC has a relationship with universities since they're obviously part of the community?
Yes, so we do have some partnerships with a lot of state institutions, local institutions throughout some of the country. But in terms of any long-standing or ongoing partnership, it really has come down, in my personal experience, to having class field trips, so to say, do this environmental justice tour. But that has been interesting because sometimes it does lead to how do people who are students currently think about how they can consider environmental justice in whatever career path they choose. So we work with legal advocates often because, as you can imagine, even by just saying Covanta is causing harm, that has even led to lawsuits against us, right? And to think about just in what different avenues people can consider contributing to environmental justice, if it's our activation, if it's, we work with a lot of environmental scientists, so I would say it's really kind of stayed in that place. This project was with Talking Eyes, with Newest Americans, with a few different collaborators, but we haven't had many ongoing things.
Why don't you come up, so because there are people who are
Sure, I'm sorry. I was just being lazy. I guess part of the reason I'm asking is that in your community is a huge health science center, right? So Rutgers Behavioral Health Sciences has a school of public health, a school of medicine, a school of health professions, and there's funding now to partner with communities and to try to do initiatives that are going to alter social determinants of health. So it just seems to me like your group is well positioned to identify partners in our community. So I just want to connect you with some people.
Thank you, please do. Right now, one of our biggest relationships is with the New School. So you've seen Dr. Ana Baptista in the film. Dr. Ana Baptista grew up in the neighborhood, now is one of the professors at the New School, and takes some of the students out on these tours and continues to develop environmental justice strategies, look into policy and how we can continue to change it. So there's certain relationships that we have, but it does make me think of, we also have folks that sometimes just come by to volunteer, and that's great. But I would say that when people are unsure of what is organizing to begin with, I say it's just someone telling other people about something that's important to them and letting them know that they can help change what the condition is. So I'm just saying all of you at this point are folks who can be here for this moment and also continue this conversation as an ongoing effort.
So we're just starting a collaboration with people in Vailsburg, actually. So the story for this collaboration, it goes like this. So we know that lead exposure, most people don't think that lead exposure is still a problem in young children, especially since we took lead out of gasoline. Of course, the last country in the world to do so, but we did in 1979. But there are still pockets of children who have elevated blood lead concentrations in this country. You saw it in Flint, Michigan several years ago from the water pipes, but there's also lead in soil. That doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't break down. It's an element. So a community group in Vailsburg, one of my colleagues called me up and said, you've done so much lead work. I did. There's this group in Vailsburg who it was identified as a high lead area, not by the EPA, not by the CDC, but by a group of investigative reporters at Reuters who made lead maps of the entire country to pick out pockets from administrative data of where children still have higher than the CDC, I want to say the CDC guideline for high lead exposure, which is 2.5 micrograms per deciliter. And so this group approached us because my colleague, who's a geochemist, has a testing kit that can be used by community members. And we just submitted a large grant to EPA with this community group. It was a community group, had to lead it with academic partners. Usually it's the other way around. This was really nice to see. To go and encourage people to use this test kit. We're going to encourage pregnant women to use the test kit themselves to see whether or not they live in lead contaminated areas, and if so, in housing, and if so, then the state is required to remediate the housing if they can prove it. So we're going to see whether or not children's blood leads change before and after. We just submitted another proposal 2 days ago, actually, to identify other groups both in New Jersey and in New York and New Jersey and New York, to see whether or not we could start using the kits there as well. So keep you in mind, because I'm sure you're part of the lead map. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to kind of break up. I want to give Bennett a chance to come up, because I think we do want a call to action. I think there's no question. I'm interested in whether plastics could be collected and somehow, as was raised. I think whether we can do anything about composting. What can we even do right here in the synagogue community in terms of composting? And do some very local things to send less garbage. But I think Bennett also, because I think there's also the whole issue of how do we stop building fossil fuel plants, so.
Well, as JV said, one of the more successful strategies is to try and stop new things from coming online that add to the problem. It's hard to mitigate the problem if it keeps getting worse. And that's been a focus in this state for the last couple of years of a group called Empower New Jersey. And I left these flyers on the table, and I have a lot more, and I hope everybody walks out with one. They have focused on 7 fossil fuel expansions that are currently underway in New Jersey, and all of which Governor Murphy has the power to stop. And many of them are being constructed by governmental agencies. 5 of these are in environmental justice communities under the terms of the new statute, including the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission, and right across the river, the New Jersey Transit Gas Plant in Kearney. They're planning a week of action. It starts on May 31, runs to June 5, and there are going to be demonstrations. And one is going to be starting at the Down Bottom Farm that you saw in the film on June 5th, focused on the Passaic plants and the Kearney plants. But there are 7 projects all across the state. And look, I don't know how many people read the paper today, but there was a report from the World Meteorological Organization today, which said that sometime within the next 5 years, the global average of heat is going to be 1.5 degrees centigrade higher than it was in the 19th century. That, of course, is the figure that the Paris Agreement is aiming at. And, you know, Governor Murphy gets up, he says, well, we're going to be carbon neutral or something, I don't know quite how he phrased it, by 2035. Now, that seems good, but it isn't good in comparison with the science. And one of the points of this campaign is, why are we building new facilities that increase the exhaust, the global warming into the atmosphere, that have lifespans of 30, 40, 50 years, if you say we're going to eliminate it within the next 10? It makes no sense. So I urge you to pick up these flyers. There are 7 of these. They're around the state. There's the PVSC power plant in Newark, the New Jersey Transit power plant in Kearney. There's the new power plant in Woodbridge being built in the Keesby area, which is an environmental justice community. There's an expansion of the New Jersey Turnpike. The part of the turnpike that goes from Newark, crosses the Newark Bay Bridge and goes to the Holland Tunnel. They want to make it wider and bigger so they can carry more cars to the same skinny tunnels. It makes no sense, and that's money. They still haven't finished the Hudson County Light Rail that they've been working on for 30 years. They don't have the money for that, but they're going to take the money for more autos, which are the biggest single source of global warming chemicals in New Jersey, are the automobiles and the trucks. So that's one, an environmental justice community, and there's a day of organizing in Jersey City against that, and the other one is all the way down in Gibbstown, where they're building an LNG terminal to export fracked gas. Please take a flyer, please show up, especially on June 5th at the Down Bottom Farm. There will be at 4 p.m. on June 5th, there'll be a rally, and we need to get people. There's a place you can text to get messages. These folks are also the ones who are organizing people to show up at all these meetings and testify against them. New Jersey Transit Public Agency, public hearings. PVSC, public agency, public hearings. There are public hearings for permits. If you sign up at what you'll find on the flyer, you'll get notice and you can show up and show the support. Bodies that so the government can see that we mean it. We don't just talk about it. We need to be in the streets.
Thank you. And I want to really thank Pam and JV, I think, for the film. Thank you. Thank you. I think you have given us a starting point, and I think now it's up to us to keep going. Again, thank you. Maybe we'll have them here all together.
One thing we're looking at is just the air mufflers. We purchased some for our truck.
So I do personal air pollution monitoring of children. We actually have them wear these devices. And I just did it in India, and these kids wore them for 2 days. We have GPS trackers in them to make sure they're being worn. And they wear them, in fact, they love them.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of work to be done here as well as there.
Yeah.
And wearing the personal air pollution monitors, because you know the measures are up there, little kids are down here. It's totally different exposure.
Yeah. Well, definitely.
So we should be in touch.
Yes.
Okay?
Could I ask you a question
Yes.
about the power generation plant?
Son,
Yes.
What fossil
he
fuels
never
are being
had any
used,
problems, and then he died from leukemia.
particularly
He's
for
always
the
lived in
incineration
South
plant?
Orange.
What do
And
they
in
use to start the fire?
2015, he
The
died
oil
of
and natural
leukemia
gas?
at the age of 32.
Yes, so we consider all of them fossil fuels, so we